If you enjoy this program, consider leaving us a tip at ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. For more content, join our DVD Extras Club. Again, that's ko-fi.com/World Cinema History, or just follow the link in the episode description. Having spent the last month looking at films directed by women, I feel like I've done a disservice to these films. These aren't films made for women, any more than the novels of Virginia Woolf or Joyce Carol Oates were female literature. Halfway through this viewing of Cleo 5-7, it dawned on me that these are just great movies, and by giving them their own special month, as if they were somehow exceptional, simply for having a woman behind the camera, I had undercut their exceptionality as simply being masterpieces in their own right. Yet again, I am a charlatan and a fraud. Let's hope this week I do a better job with Agnes Varda. I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Sila Blume.
And this is World Cinema History. I'm going to start with you, Erin Brown. We've done 4 different female directors this month. We've done 6 in the last 3 months, including Shankara Domani. What, if anything, do you think connects these films? Or are they simply as different as 6 different women?
I think it's a little of both, honestly. They're very different styles. They're very different stories, but they have a similar viewpoints in that they're showing women in a way that isn't stereotypical. Although with Seven Beauties, it was a bit different because all the women were kind of cartoonishly stereotypical.
Cartoonishly awful.
Yeah, they were horrible. So that's the only one that I don't think showed the women as being particularly sympathetic. But then again, the main character had to do the things that he was looking down on all the women for doing. So again, it gives you a perspective that I don't know if a male director would really understand that. The biggest thing they have in common is that they all have this viewpoint that just a little bit different from if a man had filmed any of those.
What were your first thoughts on Cleo from 5-7? And was this your first Agnes Varda film?
Yeah, this was the first Agnes Varda film that I'd seen. I liked how it was done in real time. I thought it was an interesting way to show her emotional state during the time while she was between getting the tarot card reading and finally talking to her doctor at the end of it. I liked how pretty much everything in the tarot card reading came true. So it left the ending kind of like, is this really good news? Or is the doctor being kind of too flippant about, oh, you'll be fine? Because I don't think she's going to be fine. You can't... I know I'm jumping straight to the end of it, but like the doctor being like, oh yeah, just 2 months of chemotherapy and you'll be fine is like, that's a little optimistic.
According to AI,
yeah.
Today, stomach cancer has a 32% survival rating. I doubt it was higher in 1962 or 1961 when this takes place.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think she's pretty much doomed. I like that.
The tarot card reader said so.
Yeah. At the very beginning, she said she's doomed. Like, literally in those words. I thought it was interesting that it had the theme of pretty privilege going through it. And so pretty privilege, I don't know if you know about what that is. It's more attractive
people. Not from experience.
Yeah. More attractive people get treated differently and frequently better than less attractive people. Or so I hear. I don't know if I would know that either. It's a whole thing because she's all about, at the beginning, at least I'm still pretty, at least I'm beautiful, because to be ugly is its own kind of death, which, hey, look, pretty privilege. And you see it right off the bat when she's crying in the restaurant and they give her free coffee and just make over her like, oh, everything's going to be okay, and kind of ignore her assistant. But yeah, she's treated, and it's shown over the course of the film, the men keep looking at her and, whistling at her, and the one guy reaches out from the car and touches her hand, which is like, don't do that. That's creepy. And then you see other women over the course of the film and how things go with them, and it's different. It's just interesting to see how it changes from being focused on her to what she is looking at instead of herself. I thought it was a really interesting and well done film.
And you mentioned, the time being a character. The clock is a character. I thought of Fred Zinnemann's great film, which runs about the same 89 minutes as this High Noon, which takes place over an exact 90-minute period, and the clock becoming a character. I think what this film does in a way that High Noon doesn't is that it follows one character to the point where in that 90 minutes you feel like you've been with them for their entire lifetime. You know as much about them as at which, of course, High Noon, because it was a little bit more of a conventional Western, it is telling a more straightforward story. I felt like I knew as much about Cleo as anyone in her life. But I'm going to turn to Sila Blume. Sila, this wasn't your first Agnes Varda, if I'm not mistaken, but was this your first viewing, or had you watched Cleo 5 to 7 before?
That is correct. I have seen one film of Varda, which I cannot remember the name of it. I tried to find it. I just cannot. It's a very, very slow, very reduced film in a house with one or two women that goes forever and nothing happens. And I also saw
that could
kind
be
of
any of her films from the 70s. So that
this
unfortunately doesn't narrow it down.
this film, I had to finish watching it, and it was not painful, but it was really John Dillman was a fast forward film compared to that film. It was really, really incredible. But there's something like a documentary where she takes part in. She's talking about herself and her art. That's another film I saw of her. But this is the first time I see Cleo. One thing that I found that might apply to several films I have seen already, but it's the first time that I see it this way. I could list about 4 different ways of watching a film intentionally. One is to consider the greatness of a person like Bergman or Rossellini or whoever that, David Lynch, whoever that may be, and be very conscientious of what this person is doing in front of me right now with this film. So for me, that's one way of viewing a film. Another way of viewing a film is looking at a very complex painting or a very interesting story where you're following from a certain perspective the whole story, the whole sphere of what's going on. There might be one or two others, but to me, this film is about another way that I perceive, and that is to see the film as the inner life of that person. One of the ways it manifests in the film is when we see towards the beginning of the film, she's already in the cab, in the Citroën, and she is not feeling well because she just had this breakdown. And then on top of that, the taxi driver is playing her music, which drives her insane. And everything is trying to be okay, but then she sees these African masks from the park and she's drawn back to another. So for me, that was one of the many scenes where I see that we are not only looking from the outside, but I was inside of her experiencing this very interesting way of making a documentary by naming the minutes that we're going to see now. Like if you're reading a chapter, which actually they're entitled chapters, in a book. And in a book, it takes maybe 30 pages. But here we need just 5 minutes because we're looking at it. So it was a very, very reduced documentary, but while being expanded at the same time about the inner life of this woman. So of course, at some point I'm thinking about Varda, what you want. At some point I'm thinking about music and background music and all these things. But for the most part, the film for me is about a very interesting view of what is going inside the life of Cleo.
I have to admit, I had forgotten just how much joy there was to be had from watching this film. I rewatched it last night, and I don't know how I had forgotten just how much I loved this film at one point, but it all came back to me, and it was like I was watching it for the first time again, and just that pure joy of filmmaking. When I was watching the film the first time in the 1980s when I was in high school, I was watching it as part of the so-called French New Wave, which, this came out in 1962. The New Wave they consider having started in 1959 with Francois Truffaut and the 400 Blows, in 1960 with Jean Luc Goddard and Breathless. And out of the New Wave films, I think this one and Truffaut's Shoot the Piano Player were the two where just pure joy. Gosh, this is what film is capable of being, and this is what you're capable of doing, taking this 90 minutes out of the life. And we should point out the name of the film, Cleo 5 to 7, it actually is Cleo from 5 till 6:30. The phrase 5 to 7 is kind of a French phrase for Varda in the documentary that Sila was talking about refers to it as this English phrase, a roll in the hay. It has a little bit more specific French meaning of that time after work where married couples go and have their affairs with their lovers before they return home to their spouses. Sort of a thing. So that's what Cleo from 5 to 7 is supposed to imply. Cleo during that time where people do this. The clock being a character, there's a clock in every scene, so you know exactly what time it is, So when she leaves the tarot card reader, it's 5:05. When she's in the cab, it's at 5:15. When she's in that kind of magically lit dollhouse apartment of hers, we see clocks and we know that it's 5:55 when she leaves the apartment, when she takes her wig off and puts on the little black dress and starts walking through Paris. And we've got clocks all the way through that take us up to her meeting with Antoine, who accompanies her to the hospital, and that bit at the park. And having every single minute of this film mapped out that way. But you also get a tour of Paris in that time. In the DVD extras, there's this wonderful, I forget who did it, but where they take you through modern day Paris to all the spots where they filmed Cleo from 5 to 7 at the particular times. And you see, like the hat shop where she buys the hat at the beginning is closed now. And the observatory at the park where she meets Antoine has been torn down, and so it's just an empty hill, but the bridge is exactly the same with the cement tree branches. So you get a travelogue of Paris, but you also get this wonderful character-driven story because you are following her as she is haunted by death all the way through this. And the most beautiful segment to me is also the one meant to be most ugly, and it's that contrast between this man, Antoine, that she meets for the first time, and her flirtation, for lack of a better word, and the closing in of kind of the jaws of death that you see in the background as the scenes from Paris become more and more somber the closer and closer they get to the hospital as they're riding on this trolley, and how it enhances that moment where you do get the news that no, she hasn't been overreacting, no, she's not imagining things, she has stomach cancer, but that she was distracted just long enough that she's able to at least say, well, I don't fear it anymore. And I know it's not a deep moment, but to me, it's an incredibly relatable moment. How many times have we, in our lives, do we work these things up in our brain, and when it's just as bad as we thought it is, but it's come to a resolution that's almost, or maybe as much of a relief as if it had all worked out, because, okay, now at least the suspense is over and we know this is what we have to deal with. And I think for that, it's an absolutely terrific ending. I know Madonna was supposed to had optioned this for a remake, and surely Hollywood would have wanted to change the ending so that her prognosis was for something else. It's just an appendix, or something like that, to give it a Hollywood happy ending. But to me, I think this was as happy an ending as the circumstances could have. Just the definitiveness of knowing, and that moment of distraction, because of course the reverse of this is that Antoine is on his way back to the war in Algeria, and so he is also using this as a distraction from what he has to do, and so the promise is he will accompany her to the hospital to face what she has to face, and then she will accompany him to the train station where he has to go face war in a foreign country. So again, I just, going back to my cold open, I don't think I gave any of the 4 films enough credit before we scheduled them, and I rewatched them as great films in their own right, when I was thinking about who would be a good lineup for female directors to focus on women behind the camera for this month. But there is something about this film, I think, that's extra special to me, that works on me. And, again, it could be personal bias, because I just relate it to that moment. How many times have we looked at the films that we love most, and it depends on when we saw them for the first time. And so I think I was 16 or 17 when I saw this film. That's the time when, if you ask somebody who says their favorite film of all time is, say, Raiders of the Lost Ark, like Erin, she probably was 16 or 17 the first time she saw that film, because that's just the perfect age to see a film, because that's that age of discovery or what have you. Well, this was that for me. But taking that bias out and watching it again last night, I honestly think this is one of the great films of all time. And I think if I were to redo that list we did during the Jean Dielman episode, this would be on that top 10 list. Yeah, maybe in place of say, Prospero's books, or I wouldn't obviously bump off Jean Renoir or Jean Cocteau or Orson Welles or Louis Buñuel, but any of the other films I don't think are as good or better than this one. I just think this film is a masterpiece in so many ways.
I actually saw Raiders when I was like under the age of 10. I agree. It's like when you see a film affects how you see a film. Like, I don't think I would have liked this when I was 16, because, like I was saying earlier about female directors telling a story differently than a male director would, what I was used to at that age was women being shown very stereotypically and as objects. And so here's a film about a young, conventionally attractive woman, and we're supposed to follow her through her day. I don't think that I had the maturity at that time to be okay with that, because I was tired of saying, you have to look a certain way to be pretty and you have to act a certain way. And she was doing a lot of performative stuff.
Would you say you weren't mature enough, or the media that you'd consumed wasn't mature enough?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's both, because you're right. There's definitely, Hollywood has a problem with how they depict women. And that's what I grew up with. I really didn't see a lot of foreign films as a kid, unless it was like Monty Python, because, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest among people who weren't particularly smart, but not necessarily intellectual. And we didn't seek out anything other than what was the mainstream. And which you can probably tell from pretty much anything I say on this podcast, that I'm coming at this particular type of cinema from a different place than you two. So I was used to, this is what you're supposed to be like as a woman. And I wasn't like that. And I didn't know at the time that I wasn't the only girl that wasn't like that. Like, none of us were like that. And we all each thought we were individuals because we weren't like the stereotype that we're shown. And some girls would try to be like the stereotype, and some girls would totally reject it. I wasn't mature enough because I was so young, and I just didn't have this perspective yet. And I didn't have the access to seeing other films, because this film obviously existed before I was born. So it was possible to make a film about women that wasn't, you have to be a certain kind of woman. The films were out there. I just didn't have access to them. So I was a very angry 16-year-old for reasons that I understand now that I know I'm autistic. Everything tracks. It makes a lot more sense. I don't think that Hollywood is really caught up even with films like this. We still get a lot of stereotypical stuff, and it's getting worse lately because of the political climate. I think that's why it was important this month to showcase female directors, because women don't get put forward as often. You don't have as many female directors that are well known. They're not as mainstream. And to have a month like this of our podcast where we're showcasing, female directors that are just as good as any male director, it's representation, and it's important that we do that.
Now, we were talking earlier before the recording started about how different kinds of music affect us. And I had made a comparison between something like this that moves like clockwork but has a rather simple bass as being more like a short Bach piece, and something like John Dielman being like something more to the tune of a Wagner opera or something like that, which has some open space in it, which allows the listener in Wagner's case, or the viewer in Chantal Ackerman's case, to breathe and bring their own experiences, as opposed to something like this. But the question I didn't ask is, do you have a preference both in music and in viewing? Do you prefer something more like a Jean Dielman, where you as the viewer are doing the bulk of the work, or something like this where the director is taking you through and she is clockwork moving you through a film?
I absolutely need both of them. To me, they're very, very different. They're both very profound. They're both very themselves. By the way, I don't think Bach should be considered the great example of mathematics in music. I completely disagree with that. I think that is how he was. And we call that mathematics.
You're saying we're putting math? Are you saying we're putting math back on to Bach retrospectively, or
we are saying? I'm saying that in my perception, over the last 4 decades, we keep referring to. Actually, there's a very good book. I haven't read it for a long time. It's called Gödel, Escher, Bach by, I think, Hofenstetter is the name of the writer. I read that book when I first moved to Europe, and it's basically dissecting mathematics in 3 directions. Musically, like Johann Sebastian Bach, Escher, which was a designer, graphic designer from Belgium, I think.
Well, everyone knows MC Escher because of the memes and the wood cuttings.
Okay, yeah. And Gödel was a mathematician. That is the general conception of the music of Bach, that is based on mathematics, or that it's a very, very good manifestation of what mathematics is. And I disagree with that because to me, let's take Varda, for example, or let's take Dielman, namely Ackerman. These two women, just like David Lynch, just like any individual, I think they are not really trying to do experimental stuff. Dielman for me is not an effort on the part of Ackerman to do experimentation. I think Ackerman was being who she was, and that's why she investigated in the way she did. And in the same way, for me, Bach, it's well known that he was a very, very good improvisational musician, and it is considered that most of his music is actually derived from improvisations. So he, in my view, could not have been working mathematically. We call the result and the analysis of his music mathematics, but that's not what he was doing. He was simply expressing what he was, period. And to me, that goes to the conversation, somewhat difficult, but not bad in a bad way, that we had 2 weeks ago, and that prevails today. I don't care that Autumn Sonata and Persona and Cries and Whispers are films made by a man. I don't give a shit. And in the same way, I enjoy profoundly this film. It happens to be by a woman. But to me, that doesn't put it in the front because it is from a woman. It has importance because Varda thought that way, because Varda was that way.
Well, this film is important historically because it is a cross-section between two just as important film movements that came out of France. One, I think everyone knows about, the French New Wave, when we talk about Francois Truffaut and Jean Luc Goddard, who, in my humble opinion, is the most influential filmmaker of all time. Like, you can't watch a TV commercial that wasn't influenced by Jean Luc Goddard. I watched Erin shorts, and Erin I don't know for sure, but I may never have seen a Jean Luc Goddard film in her entire life. But Erin shorts on YouTube would not be there and not look the way they do had Jean Luc Goddard not done it first in his films. Things like the jump cuts, the things like the sarcastic humor, the puns, the little meta influence, all of that. Goddard is just hugely influential, and he's in this film, of course. He played the man with the sunglasses in the little silent film, and his future wife Anna Karenina plays the damsel in distress in that little that little side note silent feature that's kind of a la Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, which exists for several reasons in this film, but that is actually Jean Luc Goddard himself, the man himself, the most influential director in the history of cinema, is in this film. And so, of course, this is always going to be considered part of the French New Wave. But Varda was making films as early as 1954, 5 years before Truffaut's 400 Blows, 6 years before Goddard's Breathless, and she was part of a movement that was just as important in terms of French film, even though one that they don't talk about as much, but the left bank movement, which, if I say left bank movement, it's probably not going to mean anything to anyone, but if I talk about the films and the filmmakers that were a part of it, people will be like, oh, I thought those were New Wave directors, or oh, I thought that was part of their Jean Renoir, Carney generation. But you talk about a guy like Alain Resnais, who did Night and Fog, Hiroshima Mon Amour, and would later do last year Marienbad. you talk about Varda's husband, Jacques Demy, who did some of the these joyful musicals like The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and then eventually he moved to Hollywood and didn't have a great career there, but he came out of that movement. You look at a guy like Chris Marker, who did a film in 1962, the same year that this came out, called Le Jeté, which Terry Gilliam remade into a pretty big hit here in the United States called 12 Monkeys. So this was an influential movement, but Varda came out of this movement. And unlike the French New Wave, which came from film critics through the Cahiers du Cinéma, finally getting a chance to, show people how to do it, how to actually make films in the way that they had been saying in the pages of this magazine, that and under the influence of Andre Bazin, that films should be made and take their American influence of neo noir and silent comedies and work them into a very unique French style. The left bank people didn't come out of cinema and probably didn't even really look at cinema as an ultimate art form. Varda herself studied art history. Renee came out of literature. I can't remember what Chris Marker did, but Le Jeté is made up almost completely of still photography, even though it tells the exact same story as 12 Monkeys. They're every shot in it is just a still photograph with narration underneath it. And they came at it from a completely different vantage point. So unlike the French New Wave, who were influenced by these American films and were looking for ways to integrate that into a uniquely French film, the left bank people and Varda were looking at a way of telling stories on film in a way that had never been done before. And I think what separates Cleo 5 to 7 and why it would be on my list of great films, whereas most of the French New Wave films, despite my emotional attachment to them and just that love of cinema, is that it is telling a story in a way we've never seen before, and also from the vantage point of someone we've never seen before. Erin referred to the what was the word you used? Prettiness.
Pretty privilege.
Pretty privilege. That's not something we've seen before or since covered in film. I mean, this does have some of the markers of the French New Wave. For instance, the casting of Goddard and Anna Karenina in there. That little meta bit. For example, her piano player and composer in this film is actually played by Michel Legrand, who composed not only the music for this, but composed the music for all of Agnes Varda's husband's films, Jacques Demy's, and many great musicals that he did. Dorothy Blank playing Dorothy, who you briefly see her nude from the back at the sculptor's shop. Well, she had been in all of Varda's films and appeared as kind of her nude model all the way through. Those things, for good or bad, those are benchmarks of the new wave, that kind of meta cuteness, and they're all in each other's films and all of that. But there's a seriousness at the heart of this film, that hand of death that follows Cleo from beginning to the end of this film. And there is a mark of this existing in the land, not just of film, but of literature on this subject of how do we deal with our own mortality, that gives this a weight that the rest of those are, and because the traditional new wave, I really think, was as short-lived as, say, the British new wave that we talked about so much in season one, the kitchen sink drama movement, it ran from, about 1959 to as late as 1965. And then, of course, Goddard moved into politics and away from filmmaking, as we all know. And Truffaut kind of got absorbed into the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film Director every year. Which happens with film movies. They're always going to be short-lived. But the left bank kept rolling, and Alain Resnais was making the same kind of films in the 1990s that he was making in the 1950s. Agnes Varda, if you watch in 1985, she did a film called Vagabond, which is kind of like this kind of a documentary style filmmaking, but and it follows an unhoused person from the beginning when we find their dead body to the hours that led up to it. Completely exists in the same universe as this. They were all. Chris Marker was still making these type of films in the 1980s. Francois Truffaut, who became so beloved in the 1970s that Steven Spielberg went ahead and cast him in Close Encounters of the Third Kind as the lovable French professor, and you just want to squeeze his little cheeks, whereas Varda, Resnais, Marker, you're not gonna squeeze their cute little cheeks. They'll bite your fucking head off, and that is what I love about them. And so I love this film as a cross section of the cutesy tootsy French New Wave meets the get real left bank people. And in this particular instance, in Cleo 5 to 7, I think she schools them all.
A thought that comes because you mentioned your favorite or a special scene of the film. For me, the main really profound moment in the film that addresses the style of camera, the driving of the camera. It addresses the atmosphere of the lighting. It addresses the content of the topic, namely existential state for her. It addresses what she actually does in life, namely she sings and she is at home, is when, after back and forth in her apartment, which I found to be quite interesting because it's a very, very artificial, very fantastical realm that she has built with a swing in the middle of it and a lot of kittens running around. They seem like they're all on clouds. It's a very fantastical world in that big space that she has. When they finally get to appease, when she takes off, she's first. It seems at first that she's singing this for the first time, which is not possible. But that's the storyline. She is looking at the sheet music, and she starts to sing. And then she goes away from the sheet music. She's still singing. And the whole atmosphere changes. The backdrop, I think, is more like very dark. And it reaches a climax. First of all, she really takes off in an incredibly profound way. The music, everything, her expression and her depth into that, what she's singing, to the point that she, of course, has to stop because she crosses over a certain line, going from her joy of singing and her professionality into her existence situation. I found that I like many scenes of the movie, but this one in particular I found very, very well done. The intensity, I think that's probably the most intense part that she shows, even though that's not the only one. But I like that scene very much.
Well, and that I think is a perfect example of this crossover between this left bank group of literati and the new wave, where you have the scene almost becomes, like you said, a fantasy. You actually hear a string orchestra at one point following her, and as it moves closer and closer, the beautiful light that coming in from the windows is blotted out because and you have kind of a black background, and then Varda immediately cuts to a wide shot where you see, oh, the reason why she had a black background, no, we're not going into a dream sequence. There was just a black curtain drawn behind her. And so, it's just, it's one of the better, it's just a film moments so it also, there's something a little bit jokey about it that I love. But it is a wonderful, wonderful scene. And the fact that the composer of that song is actually sitting at the piano, playing it with her, playing his role as a composer, is so French New Wave as well, because of course that was something that they loved to do. Same with the little silent film in the middle. Then that Michel Legrand, but also Michel Legrand is, as film composers go, as much a hallmark of 1960s French cinema as, say, a John Williams would be for 1970s and 1980s cinema. And the fact that you're actually seeing the man himself showing himself as vulnerable in this moment, this nerdy little guy, I hope you like my song I wrote, and what have you, and playing a character, that is something unique to French film, that they did such thing. I can't imagine John Williams doing something like this in a serious film, as opposed to like showing up in like a Adam Sandler comedy or something like that. So I mean, it's a wonderful moment in both ways.
Yeah, the combination of the way I perceived it, and unfortunately I've seen it only once. My first impression was these, like I said, is her space. It's not a studio. It's where she lives. It's where she has her cats, where she sleeps, where her boyfriend, whatever that guy is, comes to visit her sometimes when he has time. And these musicians come to me as, I see them as very close friends, not only professionally. And they know her, and they're catering to her by composing for her. So everything is very, very tight. And they are actually, as I read it, they're trying to pep her up, and they know that she might be sick, but okay, let's have a good. No, I have this song and the lyricists and everything, and the whole process of uniting all this energy into, let's rehearse a new piece, and it transcends into her, uh, kind of a breakdown in a very beautiful way. But I just found the way that whole thing develops and why it develops and where it lands, I found that really very, very well done.
Erin, were there any moments that stuck out to you in this film as special or something you'd like to talk about?
Not necessarily a moment. More of the way Cleo was characterized. It goes back to pretty privilege, like I mentioned before, but it also shows the other side of it, where she's not taken seriously. She's really worried, and everybody's like, "Oh, you don't have anything to worry about," but she does have something to worry about. But everybody's dismissing it because she's too pretty to be worried. And like even the boyfriend that comes over, which tangent, I thought that was funny to find out what 5 to 7 means in French, because I think that's what's happening with that guy coming over when he did. She was expecting him because that's the time he was going to come over.
Yes. Yeah. It's very important information, that 5 to 7 in French.
Yeah. I didn't know that until you said it earlier. But yeah, so this guy comes over and she's worried. And he's, oh, you don't have to worry about it. It's fine. He kind of dismisses her, and then he just leaves. And it's like,
well, no, he goes one step further. He goes back to what you said. He says, as long as you're beautiful, you're still alive.
Yeah.
Or no, you're healthy. I'm sorry. She later says, as long as I'm beautiful, I'm still alive. He says, as long as you're beautiful, you're healthy.
Yeah, which is a whole thing. That's just a whole other thing. Kind of like equating beauty with, with goodness, and ugliness with badness. It's like, oh, you can't be sick because you're pretty. It's like, that's not how anything works, but okay. And she says, I believe she was talking to Antoine about how she's been loved many times, but never as deeply as she'd like. It's because everything is so superficial, because they just see this beautiful woman and think, oh, this is what there is. This is who she is. And even she believes that that's who she is. But she's not. That she's more than that. And I think she comes to realize that over the course of the film. But she does a lot of performative femininity. She, like, with the hats, she decides she wants to wear a hat, and she picks out, of course, a black hat, which, it's a mourning color, but, oh, it's not the season. You don't want to wear black in the springtime. That's a winter hat. It's like, okay. So she's putting on the hats, and none of them really look very good with the hair that she has. The hair goes up too much, I thought. The hats, there was only like one hat that was flattering, and it kind of covered that her hair was so big on top. And then you find out later that the hair is actually a wig, which is a performance. Her hair is a performance. Her clothes are a performance. Everything is a performance, because pretty is all that she has to offer to the world, or so she's been told. That's how it seems like that's how she's always been treated, and so that's how she's still being treated, even though she has this very serious concern. It's also interesting that she's young and pretty, and then over the course of the film, you keep seeing old women in the background behind her. Like there's even a scene on the bus where there's this old woman's face in the window between them, and she's just there. It doesn't change expression. She's just standing there looking kind of grim, like straight at the camera. When she's in public, a lot of times there are older women around her and behind her, and there's a scene where there's a baby, and I'm thinking these are all things she's not going to have. She's not going to get old. She's not going to have children. And so all this is happening around her, but she's in this one moment, she's just pretty, I thought that was very interesting.
What did you make of the contrasting of her, both her beauty and the way she shot, walking through the streets of Paris, with the street performers, such as the guy who swallows a bunch of lizards, and the other one who puts the needle through his arm, and the little snatches of conversation she's overhearing from other people, like in the pub, and the artwork in the background of all of these things, of these just absolutely beautiful women being, it looks like, ravished by skeletons, and that whole visual tableau of the scene, just following when she leaves the apartment, when she pulls the wig off and puts the black dress on.
I think it's part of the performance that her whole life is a performance. I didn't really notice a lot of the background stuff because I only watched it once. I did notice, posters in the background for movies like Elmer Gantry, where they had the whole title of theirs, like Elmer Gantry, the Con Man. It's like, okay, let's spell out what that movie is right on the poster.
Le Charlatan.
Yeah, Le Charlatan. And there's also a poster for Un Chien Andalou in the background of one of the shots. But yeah, she's lit.
By my boy. Yeah, by my boy Louis Spoonawell. Let's.
Yeah. I thought that needed to be mentioned.
And I love you for that. Honestly, I actually love you a little bit more than I did before.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But the way that she's shot, the way that she's lit, the way that she's dressed, early on, especially when she's in the lighter dress, she looks almost artificial, and everything around her is the reality, and she's just like almost in a spotlight, just gliding through as a walking mannequin, almost. I mean, because again, it's the performance of beauty and femininity, and you didn't see as much at that point of the older women, but you started to see them, and you started to see the reality of life around her as she changes into the darker colors and is thinking more about her own mortality. And they're dropping hints about she's going to die left and right.
Well, that goes to something that if anyone watches the DVD extras or the Criterion extras on this, the film that Varda directed about making this film, Varda says the film is split into two. In the first half, we are observing Cleo, and she is reacting as the object of observation. And in the second half, we are seeing it through Cleo's eyes, and these are her observations. So that goes exactly to what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think that was a really great choice. I think that, she's more than just what she shows to the world. I also feel like when they were ignoring her song, when she was playing her music and in the cafe and everybody's ignoring it, that was like, they can't see her, so her voice isn't enough. She has to be physically beautiful to look at as well.
And that's an interesting point, because, of course, this could only be made in the 60s, where somebody could be famous on the radio, but nobody know what they look like. In the age of MTV or what have you, she could never, that scene never would have happened, because everyone would have known exactly what they looked like.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like John Bon Jovi is not going to be able to walk into a bar and nobody recognize him and play one of his songs,
Yeah, that he would definitely have attention. It's an interesting concept. Although one time I did sell a guitar magazine to Scott Stapp and had no idea who he was until they told me after the fact. And that was like when Creed was popular, and it was in Tallahassee where they were from. Because that shows how observant I am.
Creed was popular? Anyway.
Unfortunately, yeah.
There's another thing that I noticed, especially in the cafe at some point, but I believe I recall another situation where there were people. And that is, to me, there was a strong observation of the people of Paris, or let's say people. I think it's at the beginning of the film when she walks into the bar or the cafe. We see a lot of people sitting around, and we see a woman that obviously has some type of defect on her mouth. Her mouth is very bright, but just like a line. And we see a lot of very normal people. Of course, we're dealing with a time where also the poor people and so-called normal people well dressed up. It's not like today where you see, there are certain people, rich or not rich, that are really, really dressed down. Everybody was dressed up. But I believe to have overheard at least one conversation that was showing me that these regular folk are actually intellectually involved. And I believe there was one conversation on one table about how Picasso constructs his figures, his portraits. And there was another conversation that was also on that level. And I found that very, very interesting, how she's kind of mixing the regular people, but with this knowledge they have in their time.
Well, because she's going through the left bank, because just to put into perspective, that is right before she goes to see her friend, who's Dorothy, who's posing at the sculpture.
Yes.
She is in the arts district of the left bank there. So to draw a parallel, it's not a perfect parallel, but if anyone remembers Martin Scorsese's After Hours, when Griffin Dunn first enters Soho, you go in through the arts district and you exit through the arts district as well, when he gets wrapped in paper mache and is disguised as a statue so that he can get snuck out of Soho. Varda here, you enter the left bank through the arts district. So, of course, they're talking about Picasso. And, of course, Dorothy is posing for a sculptor. And you have that great conversation where Cleo says, I could never pose nude for that because I think I would feel like everyone was judging me because she's used to being looked at. And Dorothy responding that, she she loves doing it and that people they aren't looking at me to judge me, they're only looking at a shape, and the fact that it happens to be the shape of a naked body, it could be a bowl of fruit, it could be a flower, it could be anything. I think that's a terrific point that you make, Sila. And another thing that this film does really, really well is as a documentary travelogue about the left bank of Paris.
I was absolutely enamored, and I'm sure this has been done before. I'm sure I have seen one or two films where this happens very gracefully and beautifully. These rides we go into with her in the car, and the focus on the ride from the perspective of being inside of the car. You go through Pont Neuf, and that's made allusion to a lot of times, this famous bridge in Paris. The mention of the Citroën, the joy of riding on this, and these several minutes where you see from two different rides with the taxi driver and then with her friend. Another point that I wanted to make was I found interesting how in the 60s, and I am not a Paris expert, I'm actually not even a Paris lover, but I've been there a couple of times and I know a little bit about Paris. I don't see in Paris of the 60s being common to have a woman as a taxi driver.
And I love when she says to her, aren't you afraid to drive at night? And the taxi driver just says, of what? And I think that's the whole theme of this film in a nutshell. What is there to be afraid of? Because, of course, at the end, it's when she confronts her knowledge that, of her stomach cancer.
Yes.
And it's not the actual cancer that she's afraid of. It is the not knowing.
Yeah, I found that role of and the way the experience of her, as I said at the beginning, what goes inside of her, then the statement that I find Varda to be making with putting a woman taxi driver and that type of woman that is quite lively and young and uh, seems to have a particular attitude, and at the same time it shows to be perhaps a little bit silly, even though not directly, when she says, please stop, and she stops the car. No, the music. uh, I really enjoyed very much these rides, and I thought they were a very special part that she was putting into the film by showing these rides.
A bit like a Marx Brothers routine, almost, in terms of the humor there. The other part I really enjoyed was Dorothy, the relationship of Dorothy Blank, the relationship between Dorothy and her boyfriend, and she's driving her boyfriend's piece of shit car that and seems proud of it, and she's just learned how to drive, and the relationship that they have, and you see them clutching each other while they're watching that little silent film with Goddard and Karenina, and you, without it being said out loud, I think you almost get a sense of jealousy from Cleo about their having that kind of relationship, despite the fact that he's, very, very working class, and obviously Cleo is financially much more secure than they are. But there is just something full of, you see a couple like that, and you're like, the youth wasted on the young, at my age, But
well, you have the relationship, and then you have the short, which is also about the unity of a relationship, and she's alone.
And the metaphor of the sunglasses, I think, when Goddard takes the sunglasses off and realizes that everything that he's seen has been through these darkened lenses, is, I think, a metaphor that is outed by the rest of the film. I don't want to get too cutesy about it because this is not a cutesy film, and it's not explainable in little parallels like a Harold Lloyd film. But that point is made again, and then made at a deeper level by that, I think, extremely emotional ending scene when you don't think the doctor is going to be there, and then he pulls up in the car and then gives her the news. With her and Antoine outside the hospital.
There is a particular backdrop and kind of unimportance when she is crying. The couple next to her, where the boyfriend is complaining that he doesn't want to leave her house at 2 a.m. every morning, that is a third relationship that is being pushed on her face.
And that one's in split screen, which I thought was brilliant, because you're never taking your focus off of her.
Yeah.
But you also, instead of hearing that in the background, you can follow both happening at the same time. Because
it's kind of confusing. Go ahead.
Exactly, because her assistant is telling that story throughout it, and it allows you to follow all of that at the same time. And every single element of that, because this is very clockwork, very Bach-like in the way that, Bach would write a toccata and fugue using 16 notes. And, when he gets to the 4 and the 5 and the 7, eventually that 4, 5, 7 is going to come back at the end of the toccata. And then when you move into the fugue state, the 4 and the 5 are going to remain, and then you end up with the 5th note. That theme is what keeps running all the way through this film up until the end, and that last 15 minutes where you find her developing that relationship with Antoine, and I think it's just beautifully done, just like a great toccata and fugue, or even the first parts of the Brandenburg concertos. It is done in this fashion, and I think it's just absolutely. Like I said, this is top 10 now of films that I've seen. Erin, how much experience with French film had you had before we started doing these? Because we don't, besides La Cage aux Folles, which I don't count, because I don't even really think of that as a French film. We hadn't really covered French film until we did Belgian with John Dielman, but up until Portrait of a Lady on Fire, how much experience had you had with French film before you suggested we do John Dielman?
Not much. Like I was saying earlier, I didn't have a lot of access to foreign films growing up. I did see, when I took French in high school, the teacher would show us. She would show us some films, but generally they were more. Actually, no. We saw Belle de Jour. She showed us that one, which was an odd choice for a high school French class. And
I don't see why. I mean, what's a little sadomasochism between friends?
Yeah, I don't know why she picked that, but yeah, we saw that. So we saw a few films in French class, mostly we saw the French dub of Beauty and the Beast, the Disney one.
She showed you the French dub of the cartoon version of Beauty and the Beast, as opposed to Jean Cocteau's masterpiece version of Beauty and the Beast?
Yeah.
And you did not immediately haul her out into the principal's office and ask that she be shot?
Since I didn't know that other version existed, I didn't.
I'll let you off the hook, man. So you were experiencing this. You probably have never seen a Goddard film, right?
No, I haven't.
Like when I say Jean Luc Goddard, you probably think I'm mispronouncing the captain in Star Trek.
I know that you're not, but I do love me some Picard. He's my second favorite captain.
Well, we're gonna have to do some Goddard eventually. Breathless.
Didn't we do Breathless?
We didn't do Breathless here. No, because
no, not here, not us here. But
I'm sure
we have done Breathless.
I'm sure. I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
I'm
sure we did it. But we at one time but we haven't done any Goddard here. We did very little French cinema here because for the same reason that the suggestion that we do an episode comparing Portrait of a Lady on Fire to John Dielman, I voted that one down. My exact words to Erin was, I just don't want to watch John Dielman again, Well, that was the same thing with the French New Wave. I don't want to watch Breathless again. I will watch Weekend again. I think that's a film I would definitely watch again. We do have to do Goddard though, simply because, as I pointed out, he is the most influential, not just French filmmaker. He is maybe behind Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock, the third most influential filmmaker of all time. Worldwide, I can't imagine modern day media without Goddard's influence. I would rather do something like Francois Truffaut's, if we're going to do the French New Wave, Shoot the Piano Player or Jules and Jim, because they're infinitely more entertaining to me than a Goddard film. But I have that cold respect, like, this guy, built cinema. Doesn't mean I like the movies. And I think that was our debate in the Breathless room, wasn't it? Like, I was like, I respect this film more than I like it, if I remember correctly.
I do not recall that. I just remember that we did that film. I think I did. Yeah.
That was a long time ago. I was a different person then. Honestly, Biden was still president. I still had hope for the future. How naive we all were.
I could go on a rant, but I'm not going to.
This week.
Yeah, I'll spare you this week. I know I've done it before, and it will happen again, just not today.
Oh, I'd be disappointed if it didn't, Erin. Well, we should probably wrap this up just because we're getting a little bit out of control. I'm going to start with Erin. Final thoughts on Cleo 5 to 7.
I thought it was great. I wouldn't put it in my top 10 like you did, but the more we talked about it, the more I appreciate it, and I might have to see it again. I like her character development over the whole thing. That's like kind of my thing, is story and character. I don't, sad thing for a filmmaker to say, but I'm not as aware of like different shots and camera angles and things like that, because I'm very performance focused. And I thought her performance was great. I love the character development. There were a lot of things that, like, I did love when they were driving in that crappy car and her friend is signaling but doing it wrong and telling her, oh, you put your hand out the window to signal. And it was definitely entertaining. It was really well done. I really, really liked the performances. I liked the tarot card reading at the beginning and then all of the events of that following through the rest of the film. It was a good time. I enjoyed it.
And Sila, your final thoughts on Cleo 5 to 7.
I keep thinking about how important it is to watch movies more than once. And at the same time, I find it is not very good to do that, because that first impression is just what it is. But there are certain aspects of it, and what Erin said just now reminded me of that, the tarot, the beginning. That was obviously a very, very intentional playfulness with the hands opening and closing with the knob. To me, that was exceptional. Also, the face of the tarot reader her expressions, but I have, and no, before I get to that final point, I really, really enjoyed the encounter, the development, and the conclusion, the very un-Hollywood conclusion of her and Antoine, where they get closer and closer to each other. He tends to be at some points a little bit too forward, a little bit too much, but somehow it works out. And the passages where they're in the tram or streetcar, the closeness they have, and her nervousness, looking away and then looking at him, and then what's going on in her head about what's happening and how does she want to pursue these, and her sickness and her boyfriend. And I really love the way these two came together and the way they separate, at least for me, by not going all the way through with a kiss and whatever. But I have a certain problem with the definite expression of the tarot reader. She's doomed. I read it. She has cancer. She's gone. She's finished. In the 60s, in 1962, I was only 4 years of age. But I do recall growing up the dynamic in conversations about cancer. If I remember correctly, cancer was not really a big talk in those days. So I'm kind of surprised about the way they handle cancer in this film as if it were something very common. And I don't remember it being very common as a conversation piece. And also, I was very unclear about the relevance, the artistry, and the content accuracy as to what he says to her at the beginning, at the end, the doctor says to her, as to how serious it is or not serious. I found that a little bit, I was a little bit lost in how Varda wants to finish the film with the um, what do you call that? With completing the trip of what has happened to her in these hours, in terms of knowing or not knowing, and then finally meeting the doctor, and then finally meeting a man who appears to be a possible supply of joy and meaningfulness in life. So I found a little bit confusing how the film ends, kind of contradicting what the palm reader says at the beginning, but not making very, very clear is if she has something to worry about, or if she has grown to be able to look over her problem. I found that ending a little bit confusing.
Thanks, Sila. Well, first of all, I love the ending because of its ambiguity. Because to me, there's two ways of that. Well, more than two, but there's a couple of ways of looking at the ending. Is the doctor just saying, "Oh, it'll be fine. We give you a couple of months of radiation and chemotherapy." Nothing is fine with a couple of months of of radiation and chemotherapy now. Certainly not in 1961 when this film takes place. And and her observation that she's not afraid anymore. Is it that she's not seeing through the doctor's false optimism, or is it that she was distracted enough, or is it that
yes,
or is it that my thought is that it wasn't the news of whether she had cancer or not, because inside her heart she knew she had it. It was the suspense of knowing, for sure, and that when it's over, okay, well now I can deal with that. Whereas you can't deal with an abstract, and whichever ending that you choose, whichever version of it, I think it's an absolutely delightful ending. And a couple of things also that I don't think I mentioned besides how that ending just really worked on me, and there was a lump in the throat. There was just a little, there, it wasn't a big ugly cry like the end of Shankara Domani, but there was a lump. But how beautiful this film is, the cinematography throughout. Jean Robert, Alain Levant, and Paul Bonheur all contributed different parts of the cinematography, and I'm going to go on speak especially to Jean Robert's contribution, because he assisted under Sacha Vernet, who has become the epitome of French cinematographers. Those interiors of that wacky apartment of hers, with the swing and all of that, with the way it's made to look like it's being lit brightly from the windows, and how everything is white all the way through, and the complexity of how do you light a white surface in black and white, and how you have to bounce the lights off, and just how gorgeous it makes everything look. And then the exteriors, even though they're shot documentary style, and you had and when they're on the trolley, when they're on the bridge, when they're in the hospital garden outside the main hospital building, that final tracking shot, which I didn't notice, but Agnes Varda pointed it out for that documentary that she made about this film. You can actually, if you look closely, see the tracks that they put the camera on in between the two at the end. I never noticed that because it's out of focus. And that's something that, say, a Goddard or a Truffaut would have left in on purpose, because they liked to show their marionette strings. It was part of the show to them. Varda cursed that and she tried to reshoot it, but she found she couldn't get the same performances the second time because it wasn't because they had shot the film in chronological order, and so she ended up having to leave that in, but because she isn't a statistician, and having that in that shot in there bugged her, so that 50 years later, when she's making this documentary, she's still pissed off about it. And that shows just the kind of attention to detail and the little eye for detail that she has throughout this film. And so just on a pure aesthetic level, this film is just beautiful to look at, as well as having a great story and being a great documentary view of the left bank of Paris. To me, like I said, this film just checks all boxes. So,
before we end, another little thing, very very little thing that I'm not looking to have it explained at all, but it is so weird and so beautiful, and so it fits in with her character not really being in touch with perhaps herself. I don't know. But when they arrive at the apartment, and one of the things they do is she takes off part of her clothes and then starts hanging from the, I don't know what you call that in English, that tube that is stretched across the ceiling, or hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah,
so
it's a pull-up.
She's going to do some pull-ups, yeah. But part of that exercise has to do with her body, but they include that with her maid putting on her bathrobe, or some robe, some weird robe that she puts her on. I found that so weird, but so beautiful at the same time.
And it's such a ridiculous robe with angel wings.
Yes.
It is so over,
that little scene is so
and the
weird.
slippers that she puts on look like little ballerina I mean, just everything. It looked, and then she sits on that swing with the angel wing robe, and the way she's lit from behind, and gorgeous, but
But
also
to me, it
deliberately over the
fits.
top.
Yeah, but to me, it fits. Those things with the pull-ups and putting on her robe, and then coming down and stretching a little bit. It just matches that whole atmosphere of being detached but being in her place.
And it goes with the weirdness of celebrity, the superstition. She buys the hat, but it's a Tuesday and she can't carry anything new on a Tuesday, and the assistant
Yeah.
reminds her she can't wear anything new on a Tuesday because of their in the tarot card, and the weirdness of the and anybody who's dealt with a celebrity in any way, shape, or form.
Now, if you have watched some of the films, documentaries that Varda has done about her way of doing things, I see a very strong connection between this weirdness and the character Agnes Varda.
And her husband. They both were incredibly superstitious people. That was it for Cleo from 5 to 7. Erin Brown, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and I'm on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions. We also have our new website, ko-fi.com/world cinema history, where you can watch previous episodes or listen to. You can't really watch them. They're just not an emotion, but you can listen to them, and you can join our DVD Extras Club for any recurring payment a month. And you're one of us now. Or you can just throw a tip our way so we can get better equipment and keep the podcast ad-free.
Thanks, Erin, and thanks for creating that website. Sila Blume, where can we find you on the internet?
I do most of my work to be online through silablume.life, and that's pretty much the source of what I do.
Yeah, get us an ice cream while you're there.
It is not good ice cream. The good ice cream I buy does not have jingles.
Yeah. I like the orange push-ups. I like the orange push-ups, even though they wrap them in a toilet paper wrapper.
Let's not go in that direction.
Anyway, no, it's just orange sherbet. I could just go get a thing of orange sherbet for the same. I could get a whole quart of orange sherbet for the same price as one of those orange push-ups. But you don't get the joy of the plastic.
This just reminds me, I've got a container of strawberry ice cream that's really, really good, and I should probably go have some.
Well, I'll let you go to enjoy that in just a moment. But first, preview what we're going to do next week, because you are the hostess with the mostest this week.
So next week, we're going to start spooky season with one of my favorite movies of all time, What We Do in the Shadows. And I believe we're going to have special guest Luke Higginson next time.
Also, very much friend of the show, Nicole DeMonesis has decided to join us. So a lot to look forward to there. Also, I'm going to be doing a special crossover episode with the War of the Fleas podcast on Luis Buñuel, and especially focusing on his second film, L'Âge de War, and that should be coming out next week as well. So just so much to look forward to here on World Cinema History. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week for What We Do in the Shadows with special guests Luke Higginson and Nicole DeMonesis.
Mon corps, précieux et capricieux, l'azur de mes yeux, audacieux, des appâts tracés au compas qui ne trompent pas le monde, qui veut mes faveurs, savoir la saveur de ma bouche en cœur.